Hello, my name is Catherine Federline, and this presentation will be detailing the data that I gathered from the DIBELS assessment I administered for one of my classes. So the student that I was able to work with, we'll call him John for the sake of this presentation. He was in second grade and he was homeschooled, so he did not have any diagnosed disabilities. But as we'll see in a moment, there are some things that definitely were a struggle, especially academically for him. So, John is a great kid who loves physical activity, especially sports and playing with his friends. He also has just a very caring heart and wants to help others. And kind of along with this, he is also a natural leader, and children are just drawn to him. This leadership skill, these leadership skills are supported by his strong will, um, which can be a benefit for him, but at times his strong will can kind of impede his academic success whenever um, he's supposed to be doing a task but doesn't want to be doing it. He can kind of get in the way. And along with that, he lacks impulse control. So sometimes when you're trying to engage in an activity with him, if it's not what he wants, it's really hard for him to focus. So looking more at the academic picture of the student, we see that some of his strengths that his mom had presented and that I had also witnessed were he has a really strong recall and comprehension whenever he has read a story. Um, as we'll see later, the data from this assessment did not reflect this, but that was because the recall required in this assessment was not from a story that was told to him. So but that is definitely one of his strengths that his mom has brought to me. Another strength that he has is that he is very well organized, especially with all his materials. He is good at having them all in place and keeping track of his assignments. Some areas that he could work to improve on are, as I mentioned earlier, his trouble focusing. Uh, Especially completing this assessment, it was definitely a little bit of a struggle at times to get him to stay on track because he wanted to be up and moving around and focusing on other things. So another thing that his mom wanted him to improve on is his math and his reading, because both of those areas are definitely areas that she sees a need for improvement, and I do as well. So since John is in second grade and this was the middle of the year when this was administered, the only DIBELS assessment that was given was the DIBELS Oral Reading Fluency, or DORF for short. Now, assessing students' fluency is really important when it comes to reading because fluency is really a building block for comprehension. Because if students aren't able to accurately read the words on a page, then they won't be able to construct a meaning of what that story is about. So, focusing on fluency and assessing it is really important first step. Now, for this, the way that this assessment works, their students are given a passage and they are assessed on how accurately they can read and how many words they can read per minute from that story. After that, they are also assessed on their comprehension by asking, by the administrator, asking the student to tell and retell any details that were important in the story. So here we see some of the results from the assessment with John. We can see that for every part of this assessment, he was well below benchmark, only being able to accurately read 9 words within a minute, and therefore not being able to give any information for the retell. So during this assessment, some of the patterns uh, that John engaged in were, even though um, he couldn't, or he at least had frequent errors on sight words and other words, he was able to decode the words really well by sounding out the letters. However, for this assessment, that his lack of knowledge of the words really was a disadvantage to him. However, whenever he would see a word for the second time, the first time he struggled with it, I would as the assessment tells you to, I would tell him what the word was. So the second time he approached that word, he was very good about recognizing it. So some factors that might have influenced his results were, as I mentioned earlier, his struggling with not being able to be focused, but then also his environment. We were working in the same room as some of his other siblings, and there were a lot of different materials around that could be very distracting. Here's another chart that shows the results of those assessments as compared to the benchmarks. So you can see that in the yellow is uh, Johnny's achievement score, and then in the blue is the benchmarks. So as you can see, he definitely was well below all of the benchmarks. So in order to address this, there were two areas that I came up with where he really could benefit from. The first was word recognition. So word recognition, as it sounds, is students being able to recognize written words. Um, this really does have a huge impact on fluency and comprehension, because if students aren't able to recognize the words and uh, their sounds, then they really aren't able to read fluently, so therefore they aren't able to comprehend. So the evidence-based practice I found for this is called the word family Zoom. In this practice, which I'll talk a little bit about more in my lesson plan, it helps students to increase their speed and accuracy where they say words, because basically it takes a list of different rhyming words and has students practice and read through those to try to improve how many words they're able to say per minute. The second area that I looked at is sight words. So sight words are basically high frequency words that students are often not able to decode, so they have to just know them. And with these words, being able to automatically say them and know them is very important. Um, so the strategy that I used for this comes from Success for All, which is a tutoring and teaching framework and program that pulls together evidence-based practices. And the title of this strategy is Sight Word Picture Cards. So basically, students go through different sight words, practicing them with the teacher, and the teacher then adds different supports such as images to help remind the students what the word is. So now we're just going to take a look at the lesson plan that I created. So again, this lesson plan was focused on the word family Zoom, which was focused on students being able to increase their speed and accuracy in recognizing and reading words. So I pulled different standards from Ohio um, that focused on speed and accuracy and fluency, and then also incorporated an interdisciplinary connection that focuses on students being able to regulate their emotions. Since I know that at the beginning um, of the assessment that John wasn't necessarily uh, ready to engage in it, looking back. So coming to the lesson, addressing fluency, I think that it would be really helpful for John to start the lesson by having a check-in with where he is emotionally, and that can be done with what we call a feeling thermometer, and just basically saying like what he needs, and then the teacher can have him engage in different important self-monitoring and self-management strategies so that he is then able to focus on the lesson. So that's kind of the plan of getting him into the lesson. And then to begin, the teacher will model how to engage in this activity, which I had explained before. And then once the teacher explains that and the student has looked through the words and is able to practice them, then the teacher will time the student to see how many words they can accurately read from the list within 1 minute. So depending on how his attention is at the end of that, it can be administered multiple times, and there's a couple different words that he can use. So after that, the student is going to graph their progress on a chart that is provided below, so that then they can the student and the teacher can see how they're progressing towards their goal. So here's the feeling thermometer for the beginning of the lesson, some of the word lists for them to read through, and then the chart for them to track their progress. So basically, in conclusion, these different assessments and strategies should be implemented to help John, and two ways that curriculum-based measurements can be used are to first just provide an accurate present level of performance. So that was something that was lacking. Since he is homeschooled, he didn't have that data. So the data from this assessment and from the other strategies should be used to help provide that present level of performance. And from there, the data gathered should also be used to inform future instruction, to really help John grow and improve in the areas of need. So lastly, here are just my references from the paper, and that informed everything that I decided to do with John. So thank you for listening.